Special counsel Robert Mueller continues his probe into Russian meddling into the 2016 election. We take a look back at Washington's record of meddling in elections across the globe. By one count, the United States has interfered in more than 80 foreign elections between 1946 and 2000. And that doesn't count U.S.-backed coups and invasions. Former CIA Director James Woolsey recently joked about the U.S. record of meddling overseas during an interview with Laura Ingraham on Fox News.
Have we ever tried to meddle in other countries' elections?
Oh, probably, but it was for the good of the system in order to avoid the communists from taking over. For example, in Europe, in 47, 48, 49, the Greeks and the Italians, we
don't do that now, though? We don't mess around other people's elections, Jim?
Only for a very good cause.
We don't do that now, though? We don't mess around other people's elections, Jim?
Only for a very good cause.
Can you do that? Do a Vine video on a former CIA director.
Only for a very good cause in the interests of democracy.
All right,
In 1893, the U.S. helped overthrow the Kingdom of Hawaii. 5 years later, in 1898, the U.S. invaded and occupied Cuba and Puerto Rico. A year later, it was the Philippines. Early 20th century interventions included Nicaragua, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, all in the 1910s.
In 1953, the U.S. helped overthrow the Iranian government. A year later, in 1954, the U.S.-backed coup in Guatemala, overthrowing the democratically elected leader of Guatemala, Jacobo Arbenz. Then in the 60s, the list grew to include, once again, the Dominican Republic, Indonesia, and the Congo. And that's just a partial list. Even with the end of the Cold War, U.S. interference overseas did not end.
I think the Prime Minister of Ethiopia was just elected in with 100% of the vote, which I think suggests, as we have stated in our public statement, some concern for the integrity of the electoral process, at least if not in the outcomes, then in some of the mechanisms that supported the process. The freedom for the opposition to campaign.
But does he think that that was a democratic election?
100%.
Fire.
Having fun there?
As concerns grow that Ethiopia will fall into an all-out civil war.
Tensions have escalated in northern Ethiopia's Tigray region yet again as Ethiopian troops and their allies wage a war against the rebels.
Now let's talk about Ethiopia. It's under a state of emergency. A year-long conflict between the government and a rebel group is escalating. The government's telling people in the capital to take up arms.
It's been 1 year since war broke out between the Ethiopian government and the TPLF. As the TPLF, which initiated this war, advances towards Ethiopia's capital, prompting the government to declare a state of emergency, the war isn't only escalating on the ground, but also on the internet and in the media.
So many Ethiopians have become accustomed to blood and suffering. 3 years ago, when there just couldn't be an agreement between Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government and the previous leadership, TPLF, there were a lot of efforts to try to get them to come to the table and come to negotiations. And for whatever reason, TPLF did not want to take any of them and instead went to go in the direction of war. So many disasters that seem very natural and that have just popped up are not natural. They did not just pop up. There's so many hands in it that have made it possible. And one of those arms are media. You know, they feed a narrative until they manifest it. It gets to the point when you have an apparatus that is that strong, you literally create the scenario that you're talking about, when that was not what it was before. And it seems to me that anytime there's a government in a developing world that really wants to kind of let the economy grow so it can actually go down to the people, is a little bit more independent and does not want to be used and abused, the US or the Western governments tend to turn on them. We're supposed to be a pillar of democracy, right? And we are supporting, in this case, a rebel group, a small rebel group at that, who started a war against the government and the people and are literally trying to undo an election that has already happened and take out a leader that enjoys support by the majority of the country.